Now we're going to talk about some new concepts that we haven't touched on yet. The first is transitional phrases. Transitional phrases can be used to link ideas together and to kind of develop a relationship between elements of the text. So if you're moving from one idea to another idea, you can use a transitional phrase. If you're trying to show that this idea has some sort of relationship with this other idea, you can use them. For example, I just used one right there. If you're trying to show an example, you could use something like for example. If you're trying to show a contrast between different elements of the text, if you're trying to show that one causes the other, you can use transitional phrases. Now, just like with rhetorical devices, I don't have every transitional phrase in the world listed here. There's too many of them. And I also don't have every category listed here. There are some other categories of transitional phrases, but I chose the ones that are going to be most applicable for you. Right? One of the other categories, for example, is like things like next, then, right? Which is something if you were like giving details on like a recipe, right? Or an instruction manual. That's not something that's going to apply really to your essays, but these other ones will. Our first category, furthermore, in addition, additionally, moreover, likewise. These transitional phrases indicate that whatever you're about to say is adding on to the idea that you just presented. However, on the other hand, on the contrary, conversely, that being said, but despite this, nevertheless, convey some type of contrast, opposition, or limitation to what you previously said. So you said something, and then what you're about to say complicates that thing, or is different from that thing, or contrasts that thing, or is the opposite of what you just said. Or maybe explains how the same idea could be different in a different situation, something like that. Because of, due to, since, as a result, hence, in effect, consequently, therefore, these transitional phrases indicate a cause and effect relationship. Whatever you just said causes whatever comes next, or it could be the other way around, right? Whatever you just said is the result of whatever you're about to say. And obviously, depending on which comes first, the cause or the effect is going to influence which of these you choose to use. Some of these you would use with the cause coming first, others you would use with the effect coming first. Then we have in fact, in other words, notably, particularly, to clarify, for instance, for example, indicate the introduction of examples, support, or clarification. There is some difference between these, right? For example is specifically for an example, whereas in fact is just, it's not necessarily an example, but it could be some clarification, right? Same thing with in other words, that's not really an example, but you're clarifying what you just said. But all of these indicate that whatever you're about to say supports the idea that you previously discussed. So feel free to implement these in your own writing. They can make your writing more sophisticated if you are able to use them to create relationships and link ideas together. Don't force them though. Only use them where they make sense. If you just start forcing transitional phrases everywhere, that's not going to do anything for you. So make sure you're using them properly. Okay, let's do an activity. Let's try to pick the correct transitional phrases for each set of ideas. There could be multiple. In the case where there's multiple that could work, just pick one that would work. But yeah, take a look at each of these. Do all three. Pause, do all three, and then we'll talk about all three instead of doing each one individually. Take a look at these. See if you can identify the relationship here, right? There is some relationship between the first sentence and the second sentence. Identify that relationship and then choose the transition word or the transitional phrase that fits that relationship. And then when you're done, unpause and I'll show you what I came up with. This is what I have. So for the first one, Joe Biden received a higher number of electoral votes than Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Joe Biden took over as president in January 2021. This is a cause and effect relationship, right? The first one is the cause, and the second one is the effect. Because Joe Biden received a higher number of votes, that's the reason that he took over as president. So you could use therefore, as a result, consequently, and maybe some others, right? Therefore implies that one caused the other. As a result, same idea. You're going to use something in which category is it? This category. But it has to be one that conveys that the first idea is the cause and the second idea is the effect. The second one. Team A got off to a hot start, scoring 3 goals in the first 10 minutes. Team B ended up winning the game by a score of 5-3. Well, this first sentence is suggesting that Team A did really well. The second sentence is saying that Team B won the game. So they contrast each other in some way, right? They are not sort of in agreement. The first one says Team A is good. The second one says Team B is good. So we need something that conveys some sort of contrast. However, that being said, nevertheless, but despite this, something that conveys that the two don't agree with each other, that there is some sort of contrast between the two. And for the third one, hurricanes can be deadly. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina caused over 1,800 fatalities. Okay, so this one is demonstrating, well, this one, the first one's just a statement, hurricanes can be deadly, and the second one is kind of evidence that supports that statement, right, or an example of that. So we're going to use something from this fourth category. For example, for instance, notably, in fact, something that introduces an example. Hopefully you came to the same conclusions I did. Yeah, that's about all I have for transitional phrases. I think these are pretty simple. I think you hopefully already use some transitional phrases in your writing. If you don't, think about ways that you can start implementing them. You don't need to go crazy, but using them in your writing to show these relationships can make your writing more sophisticated, right? In these examples, you can see that adding the transitional phrase makes this a lot more sophisticated. It makes it better, right? If we look at the first one, Joe Biden received a higher number of electoral votes than Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Joe Biden took over as president in January 2021. That's fine. That's grammatically correct. But just adding one word here. Joe Biden received a higher number of electoral votes than Donald Trump in the 2020 election. Therefore, Joe Biden took over as president in January 2021. It's just better, right? It more clearly demonstrates the relationship between those two ideas. So, transitional phrases can be good. Let's talk about vivid style. Vivid style is something that is specifically mentioned in the prompt as a way to earn the sophistication point, right? Writing in a style that is consistently vivid and persuasive. And as we talked about, persuasive kind of means more like convincing. So what is a vivid style? Well, essentially, it just means don't be boring. Add a little flair, make your writing stand out. The graders are reading tons and tons of essays both before they get to yours and after they get to yours. They are reading about the same topic over and over and over again. Make yours stand out from everyone else's. How can we do this? There's a couple ways. Make use of synonyms. So don't use the same word over and over again. That's boring. It's more vivid to use different words that have the same meaning, right? If you're trying to talk about a cat 3 times, you could call it a cat one time, you could call it a kitty the other time, and you could call it a feline the third time, right? Don't call it a cat all 3 times, for example. Vary your sentence structure. That kind of goes along the same lines as make use of synonyms, right? If you write sentences the exact same way every time, if you are kind of introducing evidence the same way every single time that you introduce evidence, that's boring. Switch it up. Be a little bit different. And use strong, direct, and specific diction. That's something you should already be familiar with from last lesson. Before we get to this activity, I'm going to give you some examples here. Which of these is more interesting? This is not written down, but just think about it as I'm saying it. I saw a big dog at the park the other day. The dog was a German Shepherd with beautiful black and brown fur. The dog's owner threw a ball, and the dog quickly chased it down and returned it. That's option 1. Option 2. I saw a big dog at the park the other day. It was a German Shepherd with beautiful black and brown fur. The shepherd's owner threw a ball, and the canine quickly chased it down and returned it. They are the same, except that the first one uses dog 4 times, I think. The second one uses some synonyms, right? Refers to it as a canine, refers to it as a shepherd. It's more interesting than saying the dog, the dog, the dog, the dog. Similarly, for your sentence structure, if you write, the author uses rhetorical choice in line number every single time you introduce evidence, your essay becomes boring. If you use that the first time, right, the author uses this rhetorical choice in this line, maybe the second time you could say, the author states, and then insert a quote from the passage, which is an example of this rhetorical choice, right? You're doing the same thing. You're just not, you're still using, you're still implementing evidence. You're still introducing evidence, but you don't need to do it the exact same way every time. You can switch up the way that you introduce evidence, if that makes sense. So now an activity. Which of these is more vivid? Give them a read. Think about it. And I think this one's fairly obvious, but I think it's a good way to demonstrate what it means to write vividly. When you think you have an answer, unpause this, and we'll talk about it. Okay. So A, the author uses hyperbole to emphasize that self-driving cars are good. He emphasizes that self-driving cars are good in line 40 when he says that self-driving cars will, quote, save an unimaginable number of lives. This hyperbole shows the safety benefits of self-driving cars. B, the author uses hyperbole to emphasize that self-driving cars will result in safer travel. In line 40, he states that autonomous vehicles will save an unimaginable number of lives. Unimaginable may be an exaggeration, but it is an intentional one that reinforces the safety benefits of autonomous cars. Which one's more vivid? B is more vivid. Why? A repeats multiple phrases. It repeats emphasize, right? Emphasize, emphasize. It repeats self-driving cars, self-driving cars, self-driving cars, self-driving cars. And it also repeats hyperbole. Hyperbole. B doesn't do this, right? It uses hyperbole here, but it uses exaggeration here. It uses self-driving cars, autonomous vehicles, autonomous cars, right? Switches that up. What was the other one? Emphasize. We have emphasize here. And we change our sentence structure in here, so we don't need to say emphasize again. And then also A uses good, right? Good. Good. It repeats good. We don't want to use good at all. It's a vague word. We don't want that. Safer travel, right, is better than good. So yeah, that's why B is more vivid. Now it's your turn to do some vivid writing yourself. Here's a paragraph. Rewrite this paragraph in a vivid style. The paragraph says, the author uses metaphors to convey his point that recycling is important. In line 12, he says, the earth is our home and we should keep it clean. This is a metaphor that compares the earth to our homes that we live in. The author is saying that we keep our homes clean because we don't want to live in a mess, so we should also keep the earth clean because the earth is also our home. In line 16, the author says, putting plastic in landfills is a crime against our planet. This is a metaphor that compares not recycling plastic to committing a crime. The author is saying that putting plastic in landfills instead of recycling it is bad for the earth, the same way that committing a crime against a person is bad for that person. You don't need to drastically change everything here, right? But identify things that are bad in here, that are not vivid, that are not interesting, that are boring, and make it more vivid, make it more interesting. Take as much time as you need. When you are done, unpause, and we can talk about it. All right. First, before I show you what I changed this to, what is boring about this? What needs to be changed? Well, this original passage uses earth a whole lot. The earth is our home. It compares the earth to our homes. Keep the earth clean because the earth. 5 times. It also uses home a lot. The earth is our home. To our homes that we live in. We keep our homes clean. The earth is also our home. Whole lot of home. it also uses the same sentence structure to introduce evidence. In line 12, he says, in line 16, the author says, and then we follow it up the same way. This is a metaphor that, right? We want to switch that up as well. We don't want to introduce evidence the same way every single time. We don't want to use the same sentence structure every time we do a specific thing. And then also bad, right? We don't want bad. It is bad for the earth. It is bad for that person. Vague word. We don't want that. So those are our issues. How do we fix it? This is how I fixed it. You could have fixed it differently. Mine says, the author uses metaphors to convey his point that recycling is important. In line 12, he says, the earth is our home and we should keep it clean. He compares our planet to the houses that we live in, making the point that if we keep our houses clean because we don't want to live in a mess, we should treat the planet that we live on the same way. In line 16, the author says, putting plastic in landfills is a crime against our planet, a metaphor that conflates not recycling plastic to committing a criminal act. The writer uses this comparison to convey the idea that throwing plastic in the trash rather than recycling it causes harm to the environment, the same way that committing a crime against a person causes harm to them. So just a few, I think, we already pointed out what was bad, right? Never addressed all those things. I changed bad to causes harm. I have Earth here in the quote, but then I changed it to our planet. We have planet twice. Wow. Well, this one's in a quote. I could have done a little bit better here, I think, but it's considerably better than what it was, right? The sentence structure as well. In line 12, he says, I missed that one. In line 16, the author says, could have switched that one up, right? In line 12, he says this, and the next time around, I could have said, the author also says this in line 16, right? And then I could have gone into this, but I did change the other part, right? He compares our planet, and then we have a metaphor that conflates not recycling. That's switched up, where in here it's the same. This is a metaphor that, this is a metaphor that. So actually, now that I'm looking through this, not perfect. You might have even done better than I did here, but I fixed a lot of the issues, right? These are what need to be fixed. We don't want to repeat the same word over and over again. We want to use synonyms instead. We don't want to use the same sentence structure over and over again. We want to vary that up. And we don't want to use vague words. We want to use specific, direct diction. So yeah, that's really all there is to it to sophistication. We want to write in a vivid style. We can use transitional phrases when applicable. And then all of these things that we've already discussed. Using strong, specific diction and syntax. Addressing opposing viewpoints. Again, totally optional, but it can help. Using rhetorical appeals to convince our audience. Demonstrating an understanding of the rhetorical situation. And using rhetorical devices and strategies. We don't need to pick one of these things and just do this thing a whole bunch, right? And be like, all right, that's how I got my sophistication point. It should be kind of a natural mix of these things, right? We shouldn't be focusing on one of these and just inserting it everywhere. We should just kind of casually use a mix of these throughout our essay when we find a good spot to do so. The diction and syntax should be consistent, right? We never want to use vague words, but as far as, rhetorical devices, when we find a good spot to use one, go ahead and use it. Same thing with rhetorical strategies. When we find a good spot to use it, we're going to use it. And transitional phrases as well. Vivid style and diction and syntax are something that should be throughout the whole essay no matter what. But these others, we sprinkle them in there when it's necessary, when it's helpful, when it makes sense. And all of that combined together should be good to get us our sophistication point. If we're writing with strong diction and syntax, if we're writing in a vivid style, and we occasionally sprinkle in these other things, we should get that point. That's about it for today. Let's walk through a summary of what a rhetorical analysis essay should look like. We'll talk about our main takeaways, and that'll be it for lesson 3. So our summary looks very similar to how it looked in the argument essay here, right? But there are some key differences. If we look at our background information here is still the same, but if we look at our thesis, this is my thesis statement where I clearly state rhetorical choice 1, rhetorical choice 2, and rhetorical choice 3, which all have this common purpose, effect, or idea. It's important that our thesis statement has our choices and our common purpose effector idea in it. I've kind of specified each of our body paragraphs is going to focus on one rhetorical choice. Again, we want evidence and commentary the same way that we do for our argument essay. And we still want a conclusion that relates everything back to our thesis. And throughout our whole essay, we want to use vivid diction, vivid syntax, and we want to demonstrate an understanding of the rhetorical situation. This really comes in when we're talking about the effect of our rhetorical choices. Our major takeaways for today. You must identify and analyze at least 2 rhetorical choices that are used in the passage, and your analysis must include an explanation of why the writer chose to make that decision and what the effect of the choice is. There must be some common effect or purpose that links all of the rhetorical choices that you want to talk about, and if you have trouble finding one, think about the rhetorical situation, think about the author's purpose for writing the passage. And our final takeaway is about writing with sophistication. It includes using strong diction and syntax, addressing opposing viewpoints, using rhetorical appeals, rhetorical devices, rhetorical strategies, employing transitional phrases, varying your sentence structure, using synonyms, and yeah, that's sophistication. It's a mix of these things. It's not, that you're choosing one of these, you're using a mix of all of them. And that is all I have for lesson 3. Thanks for sticking with me through these video lessons. I know listening to my voice for an hour and a half every time is not the most fun thing to do, but I hope this is helpful for you guys. I hope you guys are getting very strong at writing essays. In lesson 4, the next lesson, we are going to talk about the synthesis essay. And that will be our last lesson that focuses on the free response questions. After lesson 4, lessons 5 and 6, our final 2 lessons, will focus on the multiple choice section. So yeah, thank you for hanging out with me, figuratively, of course, and I will, again, figuratively, see you soon.